Okay, so I wanted to continue talking about art and more specifically subjectivity in art, because understandably quite a few people had a question, and I've had this conversation in real life as well, the question of how can we actually objectively call some kind of art bad or good, because we are subjective creatures, right? So to some people it appears to be impossible to decide whether art can be considered bad, and people kind of begin using preference-based statements, and they say, well, this is just not for me. This is something that I may not enjoy, but that doesn't mean that other people won't enjoy it. And personally, I think this is not the best way to approach art, because there is objectively bad art. Now, is it going to mean that we are going to condemn people trying to do art? Of course not. Just as I said in my Vygotsky video, in my first video on Vygotsky, about how he presumably would hate modern art, I did talk about how if you are beginning to explore a certain type of art, you will necessarily participate in the process of getting better. So if your process is not actual good art, that's fine. And no one is ever going to judge anyone's process. Well, at least I'm hoping that people are not going to judge other people's creative process. And this is not at all what I personally mean when I say there is objectively bad art. A lot of times what we call bad art is just people trying to find themselves, people trying to find their voice in a particular area of self-expression. And oftentimes people may try a few different things, they may not enjoy that creative process, and they may not continue, and they will never get good at this art. And I'm not talking about skills, because there is a subset of people, of artists, who may refine their skill and may be pretty good at creating a certain art in terms of mechanics, in a mechanistical sense, but this still is not something that's going to make their art good. So I'm not going to suggest any kind of criteria for good art. I think that many people actually intuitively are able to perceive a lack in a certain piece of art, but I'm going to offer some suggestions on how I personally decide whether art is good or bad. And just as I mentioned before, I am firmly a believer into art as a form of communication. So this is going to be my number one criteria. If I cannot understand what a piece of art means, and if after I talk to multiple people about what this particular piece of art means, and all I hear is people's projection, just people deciding what this art piece is about, and they're not at all related, and they're kind of random and kind of spontaneous, then I'm going to come to the conclusion that this piece of art is not sure what it's trying to communicate. So perhaps the author is unclear because they're not done with their creative process, they're just kind of thinking out loud, they're speculating about certain topics, and this is their creative process, or they're just trying to push this unfinished statement that does not actually communicate any parts of the truth about the world, and then it's going to be bad art. And I'm going to try very hard to refrain from saying in my opinion, because there are ways of objectively doing that, especially if you have a lot of experience in a certain art form, if you spend a lot of time studying this art form, if you've spent much time with people who have perfected their own craft in a certain field, then I think you will be able to objectively say that some pieces of art are good or not. And again, I believe that number one criteria is seeing whether it communicates something. So if there is a statement that you and other people can agree on, and then if you're able to verify this with the author, that's even better, because oftentimes the authors will be there to confirm and say, yes, that's what I'm trying to communicate. So then you can go to criteria 2. Is this statement original in any way or form? And original doesn't mean unusual. Original means it pushes you to expand the limits of truth concerning this subject matter, meaning that you've never thought about this particular topic in this way or in this form. And this is what makes art original. So original art is going to speak about many of the universal human experiences, but they will point out certain aspects that may be subjective to this particular individual's experience. And this is what makes it interesting, right? And oftentimes this is when we will say, oh, this is an unusual take on this common topic or a common theme. Now, and the third criteria is going to be aesthetically pleasing, how aesthetically pleasing a certain piece is, and it is going to depend on the medium. Of course, if it is visual art, there is going to be an analysis of color, all kinds of texture, all kinds of visual elements, and And I'm not very well versed in visual arts. This is really not my cup of tea, but I would assume that, the different relationships between the shapes within a painting, let's say the color choices, the shading, how blurry or how clear certain lines are, this is all going to communicate different messages and different moods, and it's going to evoke different emotions. In other art media, for example, in writing, I am very much an avid reader and a writer myself. My writing is kind of lackluster. I have not really spent much time trying to refine my craft, and I'm probably going to one day do this because I love writing. I love reading and I love writing and I love analyzing literature. So I have a ton of experience doing literary analysis. I taught it for years and years and years, and I still do. And I talk to many, many people about different art pieces created in writing. So I have a lot of criteria when I look at a piece of written art. And I can tell you that the way the author chooses to use their words, the way they put their sentences together, the usage of figurative language like flashbacks and foreshadowing, which are actually plot devices, not figurative language devices, but the usage of metaphors and all kinds of figures of speech. All of this is going to create certain coherence. But then the way the author is building their characters, incorporating certain elements into the setting, the way all of the literary elements interact within this piece. So the word choice and the sentence fluency are oftentimes going to create a certain mood, and then the plot is going to create that movement. So the way the action happens with the usage of foreshadowing, flashbacks, suspense, etc., all of this is going to work in tandem and create, again, a certain message that usually can be easily interpreted using words, because it is using words. So you can look at the text and you can cherry pick certain words that may repeat more often and that create a certain mood. So descriptions of the visuals are going to be included, all kinds of dialogue, all kinds of interactions between characters, but this is going to create a superficial understanding of what's happening. Then when you start digging a little bit deeper, you are going to look into the motivations of the characters. You're going to look into justifications of why certain things need to happen. So you will look for causal relationships. You're going to look at why certain characters do certain things. And this is where you will need a little bit of historical and cultural references from the author, because depending on the time frame of the author writing is going to dictate a lot of the ideological content of their writing. Now, again, this is going to be much easier, at least for someone who reads a lot, is going to be much easier to decipher the hidden message that the author often leaves. And sometimes the author even explicitly tells you what their piece of writing is about. Either through some character speaking, they will actually proclaim what the story is all about. It's always fun to pay attention to those little details. Or the ending is going to give you a clue, or the way the story just comes together is going to give you a clue to understanding what it is the author is trying to say. And if you're just beginning to do that, looking at the theme, like what is the one word that can describe this whole story? Like, what is it about? Is it about love? So what is the author tells you about love? Is he giving you any kind of a statement about love? So when you decipher this initial theme, this one word or a short phrase, then you look for evidence to see what it is the author is trying to tell you about the specific theme. And it is usually done pretty easily with using evidence from the text, and you should have been taught this in literature classes, but unfortunately I know from experience that a lot of the students were not given a proper opportunity to analyze and decipher text. But when you have all your evidence together, you're able to come up with the message. What is the author telling you? And this is when you can go to step 2 of my suggested analysis of objectively good or bad art, is when you will see whether this is original or not. So you will look into other pieces of work that are about the same topic, about the same theme, and then you will figure out how original this particular piece is and how unusual and fascinating and curious it is to you, and you will analyze how how relevant and curious and unusual it was for the audiences in the past, if it was written in the past. So this is going to help you recognize the originality of the form. And then when you move on to the third aspect, you will look at the accessibility of the text. So you will look how accessible it is to a wider audience, because some text may be a little bit cryptic, like you have to use a dictionary to see and make sure you understand all the words. So some of the more classical literature sometimes falls into that category, and that is because language changes. Also, it's not only because the authors are trying to be cryptic, but sometimes the authors do that on purpose as well. So accessibility, the ease of reading, how easy it is to read, and then continuing with the analysis of the form, you will look into how effective was the usage of figures of speech. So were all the metaphors appropriate? Did they create a coherent mood? How did the mood change? Did it change consistently, or were there moments that were kind of out of place for no reason? Then this also helps you analyze the flow of the text. So there are no interruptions in the flow, like you're able to immerse into the story and you're just following along. And at no moments in time you feel like this is a lie. This is a story that's made up and it's stupid. Because if you feel this way as you're reading the story and you communicate to other people and they have had a similar experience, that usually means that the form may be lacking, meaning that the author probably doesn't have much experience as a writer, or maybe he's trying to explore something new that may be a little bit harder at the time, so he bit a piece that is a bit too big for him to chew, or whatever the phrase is. So this is something that may contribute to the lacking in the form, but this is minor if you compare it to the message. If the overall message, what the author is saying, the originality are there, then I would say form, it may be imperfect, form may be a little bit lacking, but overall, if the first two criteria are fulfilled, then I would say this is a good, objectively good piece of writing. Now, this does not mean that you're going to enjoy this piece of art. And I've just given you a couple of examples of visual art and of text, but I can do this analysis and I can still say this is not a piece of art for me. Yes, I understand what the author is saying. Yes, I can see the originality. Yes, I can appreciate the form, but I don't have to like it. And sometimes it just so happens that you don't like a certain piece of art, and usually the reasons are ideological, but sometimes they're kind of random, right? So you may not enjoy this particular piece of art because of your circumstances. Maybe it is triggering to some of your past traumas. Maybe you are in this period of your life where you don't really want to think about certain subject matters, or you're just not prepared to listen to this message at this time. So this is all normal, and this does not objectively make a piece of art bad. You can dislike a piece of art, but admit its value. There are so many pieces of art that I have spent quite some time on, which I absolutely hate, but I absolutely can still admit their value, and I can say this piece of art has contributed to humankind positively, and I admire this author's or this artist's efforts, and I admire their skill, but it's just not for me. So this is a little bit of an addition to my video on Vygotsky. If you haven't watched this video, go ahead and watch it. Also consider supporting me on Patreon. There is a video that I posted, a new video I posted on Patreon that is an analysis of one piece of work. It's just the analysis of the beginning of this literary piece of work by a Soviet author. So check it out if you're able to. Do take care of yourself and your community first. I hope you have a great day today, and I'll talk to you sometime later.